Mandy Banton, another fellow of the Institute of Commonwealth Studies, who spent a lot of time on exploring the Imperial Archives Mountain in the UK. So over to you for 15 minutes, how to tackle the British Empire.
Thank you, Helen. At every stage of his inquiry into the circumstances of Hammarskjöld's death, Justice Altman has asked the United Kingdom for information. Responses have been consistently unhelpful and often dismissive. In June 2015, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office told him that it had coordinated a search across all UK government departments. None, it said, have identified any pertinent material. Which government departments were considered relevant? Was any pressure placed on them to disclose information? And why was the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, with no overall responsibility for government record keeping, given this role? When the UK was asked by UN Legal Counsel the following year if all relevant departments included the intelligence agencies, MI5, MI6 and GCHQ, it refused to answer, maintaining the long-standing doctrine of never commenting on intelligence and security matters. In 2018, Justice Altman pointed to the non-disclosure of potentially relevant new information in the intelligence, security and defence archives as member states as constituting the biggest barrier to understanding the full truth of the event. He asked member states to appoint independent, high-ranking officials to review such records. The UK government took 8 months to reply and then stated that it would not make such an appointment, that all information of direct value had already been made available. In May 2019, however, after the deadline for receipt of final reports by the independent appointees, the UK reported that it had, in fact, appointed Graham Hand, Senior Sensitivity Reviewer at the FCO, to the role. So it appointed one of its own, far from independent, not high-ranking. Hand stated that he had the necessary security clearances and full knowledge of British government records, but that no additional information could be given. Once again, there was no reference to the intelligence agencies. Moreover, as far as I know, Hand did not ask independent experts for advice on what might be relevant for the UN inquiry. My title, the UK Imperial Archives Mountain, came before I considered content. I thought, no, that won't do. But then I asked myself, is there a mountain? Or perhaps was there a mountain, now eroded, whether by intent or by chance? The UK Public Records Act of 1958 standardised the selection of government records for permanent preservation and release to the public. With such safeguards, it allows documents to be held back if, in the opinion of those responsible, they should be retained for administrative or any other special reason. Special is generally assumed to mean that they relate to security matters. Records of the intelligence agencies are not covered by the Act. Indeed, in 1958, those agencies did not officially exist. How much documentation was destroyed? No reasons are given for destruction. We know little of the value of destroyed papers, and much has simply not been processed. The legislation has no teeth and is commonly flouted. Many departments do not take the system seriously. They cite lack of resources to deal with vast, out-of-date accumulation of records, or simply pretend they don't exist, and they get away with it. In the case of records of empire, there is clearly a fear of damage to the myth of British benign, non-violent decolonisation, and a fear of costly compensation claims. Paradoxically, it was such a claim by veterans of the struggle for independence in Kenya, which forced the FCO in 2011 to admit that for many decades it had hidden a collection of 20,000 colonial government files, documents removed from 37 former dependencies, including Northern Rhodesia, to ensure that potentially sensitive material was not left for the independent governments. The Northern Rhodesian files include many documenting civil unrest and resistance to British colonial rule. At the same time, it emerged that the FCO was illegally holding about 1.2 million other items, half just a few years later being assessed, but the remainder records of FCO's predecessor departments, some dating back to the 19th century. The journalist Ian Cobain identified an even bigger backlog in the Ministry of Defence. Does the MOD backlog include records of the various branches of military intelligence? A Freedom of Information Act came into force in the UK in 2005. The intelligence agencies are not public authorities for the purposes of this Act. They are under no duty to disclose information. And Section 23 of the Act ensures that information supplied by or relating to them, held by other public authorities, is absolutely exempt from disclosure. Whereas a basic provision is that anyone making an FOI request should be informed whether or not the information requested is held, this duty to confirm or deny the existence of the information does not apply in the case of Section 23 exemptions. FCO has relied on the standard doctrine that the UK government never comments on security and intelligence matters. It has applied to the Justice's requests the same approach it would have applied to a routine FOI request. The whole point of the Justice asking member states to appoint a high-ranking and independent person to review security and intelligence archives, and if necessary to report in confidence, was to surmount that barrier. Intelligent records are doubly protected by the provisions of the Public Records and FOI legislation. How much this is needed is debatable. As others have pointed out, an agency's concern is sometimes that materials may include sensitive information about the service, which the service itself has not detected, but which may be detected by others. The National Archives catalogue suggests that there are rather few open records relating to the Hammarskjöld crash, other than 40 items from the 1962 inquiry. I know another 10 or so are described as death of UN Secretary General, appointment of successor, and may or may not say anything about the crash. I recently found a new, that is new to me, reference to a relevant Board of Trade file. Hammarskjöld's name is incorrectly spelt in the catalogue. A word search doesn't find it. One file comes from the Foreign Office Information Research Department, a covert anti-communist propaganda outfit. Two come from the Prime Minister's office. There is nothing from the Cabinet Office. This brings us to another issue. Is the cataloguing adequate? Archival search is always time-consuming and often difficult. The crash might be discussed with one of the myriad committees of the Cabinet, for example, but the catalogue tells us nothing. We can ask if Mr. Hand looked at any of these files and any closed extracts from them, methodically and with an open and well-informed mind. But it seems more likely he would have been content to rely on brief and inadequate catalogue descriptions to conclude that the UK National Archives had nothing of relevance. So the mountain has been eroded by destruction, retention, closure, and the provisions of the Freedom of Information Act. or effectively concealed by inadequate cataloguing. What other government departments might we expect to have had an interest in the events of September 1961? Northern Rhodesia was still a British dependency. As part of the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland, its governor reported to both the Commonwealth Relations Office and the Colonial Office. There is no record of any communication about the crash with either. There is, however, one document in the series FCO 141, the collection of colonial government records that I mentioned. At the time of their removal to the UK, far more documents, uncounted and now uncountable, were destroyed. Let's go back to that archives mountain, or rather mountain range. Records of the intelligence agencies form the highest insurmountable peak and are surrounded by others of various altitudes, representing many archival collections. I'm speculating here, but I do wonder if other government departments destroyed relevant papers because the intelligence agencies were considered to be the lead departments. Such avoidance of duplication is certainly known. A resolution adopted by the UN General Assembly in December 2019 called upon member states to encourage individuals and private entities to ensure that any relevant records were made available for review by Justice Offman. The potential value of private and other non-governmental records is well known, but such records are scattered in a vast range of university, organisational and local record offices in this country and potentially overseas. Many more have not survived. In conclusion, the UK government has provided the inquiry with no additional documentation since 2017. Then Susan Williams and I went to the FCO on Justice Offman's behalf to view an additional file released to him. Despite our appointment, we were kept waiting for an hour and a half and then presented with what was not technically a file, but rather a bulky and miscellaneous collection of papers. We read it under close supervision with no opportunity for discussion between ourselves. We became certain that the long wait had resulted from last-minute uncertainty about the wisdom of releasing the papers. Whichever official had reviewed them had been insufficiently knowledgeable about the context and had, for example, failed to recognise the name of the MI6 agent Neil Ritchie, which appears many times in a long report by Lord Alport about the events at Angola on the 17th and 18th of September. Ritchie is referred to as my Foreign Office First Secretary, perhaps sufficient cover to confuse the 2017 reviewer, who should have recognised the name and ensured that it was redacted. It's also the case that the file contains evidence of the Rhodesian authorities intercepting UN communications. I'm going to skip the next part. In his fourth report, 2022, the Justice notes the wealth of information revealed through the efforts of independent researchers and groups, and comments that the huge increased knowledge amassed during the course of his investigation has the effect of identifying gaps that might be filled by more meaningful cooperation from the UK. His efforts to elicit such cooperation have been of limited success. What can be done now to address the problems of UK non-disclosure in the very short time left? I have a few suggestions which might be taken up in the roundtable discussion. Firstly, UK ministers need to be persuaded that it is shameful not to treat the investigation into the death of Hammarskjöld with the seriousness they would treat such a matter as fatalities in a terrorist attack. They need to commit to appoint a new reviewer, genuinely high-ranking and independent. A retired, very senior civil servant or judge with a knowledge of how the security agencies work should be selected. A new appointee should be properly resourced and be prepared to consult external experts and the appointees in other member states. The searches must be thorough and iterative. The appointee should be prepared to return to documents already researched or disregarded in the light of new evidence and fresh hypotheses. In other words, the appointee must be authorised and motivated to do the job properly on behalf of Justice Auckland. Thank you.